Hello there and welcome to my overview of Combat Patrols issue 21 and 22, and it's quite exciting because we're finally starting a brand new Combat Patrol. We are starting with the Aeldari. So with issue 21 we get an Aeldari commander. This time it's a Farseer, a lovely looking model I can't wait to get to put together and paint, and we also get a battle mat for our future games of Combat Patrol. Issue 22, though, is another paints issue. This time we're getting Avaland Sunset, which is a yellow, and Catachan Flesh, which is a brown. So, going back to issue 21, the very first thing we'll be doing is building our model, and we are well out of the realm of push-fit models now, so make sure you've bought some glue, as you will not receive any with any of your parcels, unfortunately. My personal choice is Revel, because you get a nice long applicator that's really useful for gluing in the finer parts. Let's start snipping the Farseer from his sprue. I've gone back to actually using my regular clippers rather than the ones that actually came with a set, as my regular clippers are a lot better. I would advise definitely picking up a new set of clippers by now, because you can get a lot better and a lot cheaper ones than the ones that Games Workshop deal with. Of course, once all the bits have been snipped, we're then going to clean everything up. I use the edge of a blunt scalpel. This is my little hobby knife that I've had for a very long time. It's not sharp whatsoever. This is why I'm perfectly fine doing it next to my finger, so don't worry about that. One of the pieces, however, make sure you're very careful with it, because it's got a very sort of thin line next to it, and for some reason the sprue is actually connected to it, so be very gentle with whatever you're using to clean it off. You don't have to push hard on these things. If you've got something that's sort of sharp enough to clean the plastic, just keep doing it, and over time you'll get a nice smooth surface. And finally, of course, after everything's clean, we're going to glue it all together. There he is, an absolutely splendid model. I really am a big fan of Eldar. I haven't used them though in a very long time. I've been playing 40k for a long time. I haven't used these guys for a very long time, so I'm quite excited about getting some brand new Eldar. Once we've put our little dude together, it's time to start painting him. Lots of steps this time, but then he is a commander. There's quite a lot more detail on this guy than there will be on other stuff that's coming with the Aeldari. They changed the name and I'm still wanting to call him Eldar. He's going to look great when he's finished. However, I'm going to cheat a little bit. They want me to paint him Mephiston red, but there ain't no way I'm base coating all of these models by hand. So I'm going to use some Sanguinine red from Colourforge. It's basically the same as Mephiston red, but it's a full can, it's a bigger can, it's nice and cheap, and well, it's a faster way of getting these done. And here he is, all sprayed up, a lot faster and a lot quicker. There is a little bit of tidying up to do, but that's not a problem. That won't take too long whatsoever. We're kicking things off with some Wraithbone to begin with. That's going to take a few layers, as Wraithbone over red is a little bit fiddly. So you want to do thin layers and just basically go from there. To be honest, you want to do thin layers with everything, because you want a nice, smooth, clean layer. So slowly but surely, we're getting each colour done. It doesn't take too long to paint this guy. It only took round about sort of an hour to get him to the point that they want you to get him, and he is a lovely model to paint. He is, however, a little bit fiddly, so make sure you take your time. Don't worry about if you make any mistakes. You can quite easily correct them later on, or sort of correct them as you go. So after the painting, we've got some lore, which is about the Aeldari, giving newcomers a sort of small and sweet explanation about who they are and what they're like in battle. And then we go back to the Imperium. Well, to be honest, it's about everything really, because we're talking about the warp and space travel in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Next up, we've got another short story, a nice little bit of fiction, perfect toilet read, and of course it helps newcomers get used to what this new faction is all about. And I just said fraction, not faction. This is followed by the little naming convention they have in these magazines, but I think it's a nice little touch, especially for kids that are getting into 40k. And then it's followed by the actual datasheet, so you can use this guy in battle, which is sooner than you think, with scenario 17, behind enemy lines. This scenario is actually pitching the Farseer against units of 2 termagants each, only for 4 battle rounds, and as long as he can survive, the Aeldari player is going to win. Of course, you get a couple of example turns of how you can choose to play the game if you so wish, but again, you can play this however you like. You don't have to follow these if you don't want to. They're literally just there for flavour, and so newcomers can play the game better. We haven't seen forces this small since the beginning of the actual magazine collection itself, and the Aeldari have just got that lovely Farseer, and he's up against units of termagants. There's no role for deployment or to see who goes first, as the Aeldari player is the only person on the board, so he's going to go ahead and steam straight forward towards that first objective marker. Tyranids then roll to see where their termagants are going to deploy, and it's in zone 1. And naturally these guys are going to move forward as well. The map we're playing on isn't that big, so they will be in range for shooting immediately, and that's exactly what they are going to do. Only one shot managed to hit, and it failed to wound. So as turn 2 begins, the Aeldari Farseer is close enough to take the first objective, and that's exactly what he's going to do. And then obviously he's going to move forwards towards the next objective. We finally get a chance to see what this guy is going to do in combat. So he's going to use his Eldritch Storm Psychic Blast at those 2 termagants. He rolled a massive 6 attacks, however he only managed to hit with 3 of them. Those 3 hits though, they were good enough to get through the termagant's tiny amount of armor. The Tyranids once again rolled for the first zone, so that's where they'll be deploying. Once again, moving up towards the Farseer. The Tyranid shooting phase was a lot better than last time, however they managed to hit with both shots and wound with both, and the Farseer failed one of his saves. At the beginning of the Aeldari turn, the Farseer is close enough to that objective to claim it, so that's exactly what he's going to do. And then, being the smart boy that he is, and not wanting to get in close combat really that much, he's going to back off a little bit, as he's definitely got higher range. And that Eldritch Storm reduced 4 shots, but it only actually managed to hit with 1, but it did at least kill one of the Tyranids. At the beginning of the termagant's turn, they turned up once again in zone 1, they're pretty obsessed with that one, and they quickly ran forward. The lone survivor from the other unit also decided to charge forward as well. With everything being in range, I decided to roll all 3 dice together with only 1 successful hit, which of course failed to wound. If you notice I'm rolling a lot of 1s today, that's normal for me. Things are looking really good for the Farseer, so he's just going to back up to stay away from this termagant as much as possible while still being in range of his Eldritch Storm. He fired off 2 shots, which he managed to hit 2 and wound 2, taking 2 more termagants off the board. Once again, those termagants decided to turn up in section 1. I don't know what it is about it, but they really do love that zone. And all the termagants moved up. They were still in range as well. They managed to fire off 3 shots, only hit with 2, and then both of those hits managed to fail to wound. And in a last-ditch effort to take out that Farseer, one of the termagants ran forward bravely, completely failed to do anything, and then got his head kicked in as a result. The Farseer is not great in combat, but he's a darn sight better than a termagant. So that's the first scenario of this video out of the way, with a win to the Aeldari. On the last final page, we've got a lovely shot of the next 2 combat patrols as well. Moving on to issue 22 and the 2 paints. The very first thing we see is the how to paint guide, and basically we're going to be catching up and getting our models even closer to a complete base coat completion. There will be highlighting and shading later, but we're going to have to wait for those paints to arrive with the deliveries. For the new people here, I've already got my own Tyranid paint scheme, however I am painting the Tyranid Prime the way they are in the book. First paint we'll be using is Catachan Flesh, and this is mostly being used on the Space Marines to paint any pouches and straps. A little bit is going to be used for the Aeldari Farseer, because he's got a pouch as well. For the Space Marines, the Avalanche Sunset is not really going to be used that much. It's just mostly on the Librarian and a little bit on the Teleport Homer. This paint is more used for the Tyranid stuff, but as I said earlier, my own paint scheme, so I'm only going to be using it for the Tyranid Prime, and that's going to be used for his eyes. And there we are, everything's now all up to speed. We didn't have to paint on every single miniature. With the Space Marines, it was just a few, a couple of Terminators, and the Terminator Captain didn't need any of the colours. It's a lot nicer to actually see these guys getting closer and closer to their completion. Can't wait for the actual shading process to arrive though, as honestly, I just want to get on with these guys and paint them up properly, but I'm trying to go as slow as possible for the viewers at home. After that, we go back into the lore, and this time it's more Aeldari, giving you lots of nice snippets about what the Aeldari are about once again. They are one of my favourite races, and we've also got a lovely page with different craft worlds. Then we start to look at the galaxy as a whole and start going into sort of more the war zones and things like that with a nice double splash page. However, because the magazine tears apart, I wouldn't advise using it as a poster. This is followed by highlighting some of the war zones. Then we've got a random name generator for naming our Farseer and the upcoming Wraith Lord. So then we go into, well, it's not really scenarios anymore, it's actually just full games of combat patrol. A quick explanation of how to do it, and of course it shows you that you will need scenery, which is something that doesn't come with this magazine. So we're going to be playing our very first full combat patrol mission using all of the models we've got from the combat patrol except the 2 premium ones. Gives you a nice little rundown of how to actually set things up, and then we get our very first core mission, and behind that is a nice little table to keep track of who's beaten who in your games. The very last page is once again a splash page to show off some models. You are going to need quite a lot of space for this because you're going to be using both your battle mats to set things up. They are quite large as well, and annoyingly they're 2 completely different colours, which really bugs me more than it should. As a wargamer who's been playing for a very long time, I've already got some scenery. None of it's painted, unfortunately. I do keep meaning to do it, but it's always on the back burner. Now, normally for these games, you'd roll a random dice to see which mission you're playing, but we've only got that one core mission, which is Taken Hold, so that's the only one we're going to be playing today. So, having set up the scenery, I then set up the objectives. And of course, everything we'll be using for the Tyranids is on the board. They are going to be the attackers, while the defenders will be the Space Marines we own. The defenders are the ones that deploy first, so we're going to start with the Infernus Marines. Once both armies are deployed, it's important to remember that the Tyranids, while numerous, aren't as tough as the Space Marines, so if you are playing as a Space Marine player, don't panic too much. Not everything, of course, was deployed straight away. The Von Ryan Leapers were deployed with their Infiltrator rule. The Tyranids won the roll-off to see who goes first, so they'll be charging ahead to get towards those objective markers as quickly as possible. The only thing that didn't actually charge forward are the Von Ryan Leapers, because I wanted them to be there so they can take care of the inevitable Space Marine captain as he edges round the corner. With the Tyranids shooting, the Termagants fired at the Infernus Marines and managed to pick off one of the Infernus Marines and wound another. The Barbgaunts then decided to fire at the Terminators. This, of course, will slow the Terminators down and stop them from getting to the objective as quickly as they can. However, with a respectable amount of shots, they didn't actually do very well at the wounding, and they only managed to wound one Terminator. The Tyranids didn't do much damage to the Space Marines, so naturally they started to move forward to try and claim the objectives that are closer to them. The largest move was down the flank, with the Space Marine Chaplain screaming down the line, ready to take on that parasite of Mortex. However, he managed to miss in his shooting phase. Both the Infernus Marines and the Terminator Captain were in range for the Termagants, so they opened fire on those. The Terminator Captain only dealt 1 wound, while the Infernus Marines only managed to get 2. This was mostly down to their horrendous wound rolls. The Terminators then fired back at the Barbgaunts. They did a lot better than the Infernus Marines. They managed to take out an entire 2 Barbgaunts. On the combat phase, and the Chaplain on a bike managed to charge the Parasite. And while wounding with 4 of his attacks, the Parasite only managed to fail 2 of his saves. And even though the Parasite managed to whiff most of his shots, he still managed to wound the Chaplain once. So, on to turn 2, and it's looking fairly good for the Nids at the moment. They're in a lot better position than the Marines are for capturing those victory points. Speaking of which, they've managed to grab 5, as they are close to one of the objective markers. So, the Psychophage decided to move up to his closest objective. The Termagants also moved forward, capturing their objective. The Wing Prime thought he'd be a sneaky boy and put himself into a position where he could attack those Infernus Marines. And the Von Ryan Leapers moved up into a position where they could help out the Parasite. In the shooting phase, the Termagants once again fired at the Infernus Marines, this time doing a pretty spectacular job and knocking off another one. The Barbgaunts then once again decided to fire at the Terminators, but not firing that many shots though. Still, it'll help slow them down and stop them from getting closer to that objective. The Psychophage also fired at those Terminators, and he managed to knock one off the board. The Wing Prime charged forward into the Infernus Marines, however, he didn't take into account of the Infernus Marines using a command point to use Overwatch and completely annihilating him as he did. Thankfully though for the Tyranids, the Von Ryan Leapers would have no such fear as they charge straight into the Chaplain on a bike. And as Von Ryan Leapers get to go first, they absolutely swamp the Chaplain on a bike with attacks, even though they didn't roll that well. They still managed to bring him up to 4 wounds. Unfortunately for him though, however, the Parasite took that last wound, taking him out of the game. The Parasite and the Von Ryan Leapers then consolidated forward closer to the Space Marines lines. Things aren't going as badly as it looks for the Space Marines, however, as they're still close to one of those objective markers, claiming 5 victory points for their own. So the Terminators very slowly move towards that Psychophage, getting ready to shoot him and then swamp him and attack him in combat, while the Terminator Captain moved forward and the Infernus Marines stayed where they are, making sure they've got their objective. Then both the Captain and the Infernus Marines started firing into the Termagants, the Captain once again missing one of his shots, but the Infernus Marines faring a lot better, and taking a huge chunk of the Termagants out of the game. The Terminators then fired into the Psychophage, but its toughness was proved too much for them, and they only managed to wound it with 1 wound. Librarian, on the other hand, fared a lot better and managed to get a devastating wound on him, bringing his total wounds up to 2. In combat, the Space Marine Captain charged the Termagants, and the Terminators charged the Psychophage. Starting with the Terminator Captain, he managed to hit with 5 of his 6 attacks, and he managed to wound all 5, removing them from the game. Termagants now looking a lot worse for wear. Terminators, on the other hand, managed to only wound the Psychophage with 3 more wounds, and most of those came from the Power Fists. The Librarian then mustered up all his strength and completely managed to whiff. Even though he hit with 3, he didn't actually manage to cause any wounds. The Termagants fought back, and naturally they failed to wound the Terminator Captain. And the Psychophage only managed to wound 1 Terminator with his return attacks. At the beginning of turn 3, the Termagants failed their Battle Shock test, but that doesn't matter as they're still claiming 2 objectives, one from the Psychophage and one with the Bargaunts, giving them a total of 10 victory points. With the Psychophage and the Termagants both in combat, there's not really much left to move. The Bargaunts aren't going to go anywhere, so it's just the Von Ryan Leapers, which are going to get into a better position to attack the Terminator Captain, and the Parasite is also going to move around the back as well. The shooting phase is also going to be skipped as there's no viable targets for the Bargaunts, so we're going to dive straight into the combat, with the Von Ryan Leapers making their charge. The sheer weight of attacks caused by the Von Ryan Leapers onto the Terminator Captain meant he actually did eventually fail 2 of his armor saves. The Termagants also had a crack at the Terminator Sergeant, but failed to cause any wounds. In return, the Terminator Captain went after the Termagants, and he managed to bring down 3 of them, which sadly wasn't enough to completely destroy the unit. This is also an error of judgment that will cost him later. Moving over to the Psychophage and the Terminators, he only managed to throw out 2 attacks on the Terminators, and both of those managed to fail to cause any wounds. The Power Fists of the Terminators managed to cause 2 successful wounds, meaning he took 4 points of damage, bringing him very close to death. And it was the Terminator Sergeant that managed to get the final blow and take the Psychophage out of the game. The Terminators then consolidated closer to those Bargaunts that have been causing the issues all game. It's not looking too bad for the Space Marines at the moment, with them grabbing 2 objective markers for themselves, one with the Infernus Marines and one with the Terminators, meaning they gain an additional 10 victory points. The Captain can't move, and the Infernus Marines are going to stay stationary next to their objective. But the Terminators are out looking for revenge, so they're going to move closer to those Bargaunts. The Terminators are the unit that can actually really fire this round for the Space Marines, so they're going to unleash everything into the Bargaunts and somehow only manage to cause 1 wound. But then, if you've been watching this fully, you've seen my dice rolling, and you can see how bad it actually is. So, only causing 1 wound, they thought they'd get rid of the rest with a little bit of close combat, so they charged, making it quite easily. On to combat itself, and the Von Ryan Leapers, who struck first, completely tore apart the Terminator Captain, ripping him to absolute shreds. The Von Ryan Leapers then consolidated closer to the Infernus Marines, while the Termagants moved closer to their objective marker. The combat between the Terminators and the Bargaunts was very much a one-sided job, as the Terminators completely battered the Bargaunts. The Terminators themselves then consolidated slightly closer to the objective. There's not much left for the Tyranids on the battlefield, and thankfully though, the Termagants passed their battle shock test, meaning they gave themselves an extra 5 victory points. There wasn't really much movement for the Tyranids apart from the Parasite of Mortex, who moved closer to the Infernus Marines. The shooting phase is short and sweet, as those 2 Termagants that are left in that unit are going to take shots at the Infernus Marines. However, try as they might, they fail to do any wounds. The Von Ryan Leapers then charged forward, easily making it, however not before the Infernus Marines once again used Overwatch and fired some shots, but they didn't fire nowhere near enough to do really that much damage, only wounding the Von Ryan Leapers for 2 wounds. Seeing the success of the Von Ryan Leapers, the Parasite of Mortex also decided to charge, however he very nearly didn't make it with a measly roll of 3. Thankfully though, he was just in range. The Von Ryan Leapers absolutely battered the Infernus Marines, removing one of them off the board. And the Parasite of Mortex also managed to take one out as well. The Brave Marine fought back, but unfortunately he wasn't able to cause any wounds, with the Parasite of Mortex easily saving. Now it's really looking quite bad for the Space Marines, however they still do have hold of one objective, so they will get 5 points this round. The new unit that can actually do any movement are the Space Marine Terminators, so that's what they're going to do. They're going to try and get around that corner and at least charge that Termagant rather than shoot them, so they can actually get closer to that objective marker and then hopefully dislodge the Von Ryan Leapers and the Parasite of Mortex next turn. However, it wasn't to be. And of course, because the Von Ryan Leapers get to go first, they completely annihilated that lone Infernus Marine. The Parasite moved closer to the objective, and the Von Ryan Leapers moved closer to those Terminators. So the beginning of the final turn is looking like a sure victory for the Tyranids, and I don't think there's really anything the Space Marines can do. The Termagants once again passed their battle shock test with ease, and the Parasite of Mortex claiming their other objective means the Tyranids gained another 10 victory points. So the Termagants are going to move themselves so they're closer to that objective marker, and the Parasite of Mortex is happy where he is, claiming the 4th. The Von Ryan Leapers on the other hand are going to move closer to those Terminators. Even though there's 2 of them, those 2 Termagants are still going to fire, but they are going to completely miss the Terminators. Von Ryan Leapers then decide to charge forward toward the Terminators, and I completely forgot to use a command point to fire the Terminators on Overwatch. And again, with the Von Ryan Leapers getting so many lovely attacks, they managed to whittle down and kill 3 of the Terminators. That's a pretty big blow for the Space Marines, meaning they've only got 2 models left on the board. The return attacks, however, from the Terminators managed to actually completely annihilate the rest of the Von Ryan Leapers, and it was all thanks to the Librarian. However, they chose not to consolidate, or else they'll lose that objective marker. And as they're the only unit on the board, they didn't want to do that, but they do gain 5 victory points. The Terminators then marched forward towards the Termagants, and then just one of the Stormbolters managed to wipe them both off the board. And with that, that's the end of the game. Even though it was an absolute bloodbath, in the end it was still a slight victory to the Tyranids, getting 30 over the Space Marines 25. So I took note of who won on the little grid, and then the final page is a sneak peek at the next 2 issues, which by the look of things we're getting a full Guardian unit. However, before that arrives, I do have one sneaky little issue to show you guys, but that'll have to wait for the next video. Overall, it's been a pretty good couple of issues. Not happy with the fact we get paints, but I am happy the fact that we are getting these guys closer to completion. And I love the Eldar or Aeldari, and it's been a very long time since I've actually played with them, so I'm really looking forward to getting the combat patrol for these guys. It's also nice to finally get away from the Tyranids and the Space Marines and to start sort of delving into the other aspects of 40k. And if you are collecting this series, I really hope you're having as much fun as I have, and I hope you're excited about the new stuff as I am. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back next week with another video. That sneak peek I gave you earlier is another model. It's a special model, it's a one-off model if you subscribed. And if you want to see that, give the channel a subscribe, the video a like, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.